Hello, my name is Alexander Penn. This is my presentation on alternative energy, hydrogen. This is for EIU 4102G, Technology and Society, Dr. Chinchilla. This to up here. Perfect. To understand hydrogen energy is first important to understand what a fuel cell is. A fuel cell is an electrochemical device that converts chemical energy into an electrical form. There are two types of electrodes, an anode and a cathode. Not much of a chemist, so I don't understand too much of this. I do understand that it is similar to a battery, except that it does not need to be recharged, in that as long as hydrogen is supplied, there is no need. The hydrogen is basically the recharging process without that. Hydrogen-powered fuel cells are becoming more and more popular. They haven't been as popular in most recent years. Electric cars, energy, stuff like that has been coming into light. This is a few years old, of course, at this point because the book is outdated, but there are some more recent things that have been going on, but mostly nothing with hydrogen. Let's see. This is a fuel cell. As we can kind of see here, on the left, we have the fuel going in, which is the hydrogen, and on the right, we have the oxygen. I don't really understand how it all works, but it comes in, goes out, and the electrical current is produced. As you can see on the bottom there, there's the anode, cathode, and your electrolytes. Many uses for hydrogen power. Cars, of course, can be powered by hydrogen. There are a few out there currently. Toyota made a Prius that was powered by hydrogen. Ford has a Focus. I believe there's a Ford Edge out there, and a Ford Explorer, I know, which will be just kind of discussed later, as one of the pioneers in hydrogen energy actually still drives one. So I have not seen many of them. There are also trucks out there that are powered by hydrogen. I can't really think of any. I don't even know of any trucks. Buses. Iceland used a few hydrogen buses during an experiment we'll talk about later in this video. None of them are still currently running. Hydrogen is very, very tough to. The large space needed to store the hydrogen doesn't really work for cars. There's not a lot of room. Buses were the perfect way for this to work because buses are so large you could store it on top of the bus, and the bus would run an entire day without needing to be recharged. And then, of course, hydrogen power can be used for electricity and to heat homes and stuff like that. It's kind of been replaced by geothermal energy. Geothermal kind of produces the hydrogen, but the big thing now is geothermal, solar panels, wind turbines, a lot of electrical stuff. Not much for hydrogen recently. This is a hydrogen infrastructure. Kind of tough to see here. In the top right, you have your hydrogen produced from the wind turbines and solar panels. It then moves down the road. It's kind of really tough to see. It's a small picture, but moves down the road. Then there is a hydrogen fueler and a hydrogen storage compartment. So the hydrogen is produced, stored, and then it can be transferred to basically just like a gas station. Vehicles stop in, they refill. You can have buses, cars, whatever you need to refill there. I understand that refill times are very quick with hydrogen. Unlike electricity, which most electric cars need to be plugged in for 8 to 10 hours to get a full charge, if not longer. So I understand hydrogen is very quick in this area. And on top of the building, we can have, if you see the building over on the left-hand side, hydrogen can be stored on the top of the building. It uses a backup power source. Hydrogen can be used to generate electricity to basically fuel the building. Also can be used, if come down towards the bottom there, you can use it to heat and cool homes, basically. So a hydrogen residential storage unit placed on the side of the building holds and stores the hydrogen, which then is transferred into your home, which allows you to heat and cool it. This would be the ideal hydrogen infrastructure. Iceland did something very similar to this. They're not doing much of it anymore. Like I keep saying, stuff is being replaced by electric stuff. So, next slide here. There are pros and cons. Just with any sort of system, there will always be pros and cons. you gotta just kind of decide whether the advantages outweigh the disadvantages. The advantages are it increased thermal efficiency. It's very, very efficient to use. And there are longer periods of electricity because of that. You don't have to rely so much on the fossil fuels to produce your energy. There is little to no pollution when using hydrogen. As we'll talk about in the disadvantages here, there are disadvantages of producing hydrogen. It can create pollution and quickly recharge. As I stated before, hydrogen is very, very easy to just refill and just keep going. So city buses could run all day, recharge at night, back the next day, and you would never there's no need to stop during the day or anything like that. Electric cars, on the other hand, I don't know if you know too much about them, but Tesla's a big one right now. Most of them have anywhere from 150 to 300 mile radius. So you have to stop at one of a supercharging station to refill the the battery inside. So they don't last as long. The range on a bus typically is 350 miles, I believe, on a hydrogen bus. So it's pretty good. The bus obviously just travels around the city, so it doesn't go too far. There are some disadvantages to it, of course. Much greater cost, of course. It's new technology. We haven't found efficient ways to produce it yet. And it just costs more to produce it. It costs more to store it. It's new. With anything new, there's gonna be a lot of upfront costs. Energy savings in the long run will be great, but upfront costs. Long-term reliability hasn't been around long enough. We don't really know how well it will do. Iceland is a perfect example. It's in a very harsh climate, so if it can withstand that, it should be able to withstand just about anywhere in the world. We'll have to look at the opposite ends of the spectrum and produce it in extremely hot temperatures and see how it does there. But if it can withstand Iceland's extremely cold temperatures, we should be all right. The components to make the systems are very expensive. The metals used are very, very expensive right now. And that's just typical of any new product. We don't really know how much what it's going to take to produce. As soon as companies find out, that, hey, people want this stuff, we can raise prices. It's just kind of the way the world works, sadly, but it's the way things are. As I mentioned before, CO2 is released into the air during production. Fossil fuels are used to burn the methane that is required to turn it into hydrogen. So there are also some, as I'll talk about this in a little bit, there are some other ways to do it, but CO2 is released into the air, which kind of negates the effects of the environmental friendliness. And low power density. So here we have the formation of a hydrogen cells, as it can be obtained from two sources. Both reactions require extra energy to go into it. You can reform methane into hydrogen, which I kind of stated before, and there is electrolysis. Both produce CO2. I couldn't really find a picture of reforming methane into hydrogen, but I did find one about electrolysis. As you can see, splitting water with electricity to produce hydrogen and oxygen. I know the energy output comes out from there. So fuel cells use hydrogen, which is considered environmentally friendly. However, extracting the hydrogen is not at all environmentally friendly. Methane and electrolysis, as I said before, are kind of the two ways of making the hydrogen. Requires combustion of methane to supply heat energy to reform the methane into hydrogen. And you actually lose much of the energy efficiency. So I know electrolysis requires passing electricity through water. If a fossil fuel is needed to complete this, which most of the times it is, unless you have a running water source, waterfall, something like that, geothermal systems. If fossil fuel is needed to complete this, the heating value of the hydrogen will be less than 1/3 of the fossil fuel that was used. So it's not efficient at all in that sense, which again negates the environmental friendliness of hydrogen. The hydrogen experiment, kind of touched on this a few times here. Iceland's hydrogen economy proposed by Professor Hydrogen, which is tough to pronounce his name. Bragi Arneson is how I would assume it is pronounced. The first policy was drafted in 1998 and passed. They committed to being the first hydrogen economy by 2050. I know that's still kind of a few years out, and we're not even close to that yet. But 1998 was a few years ago, so you would hope to see that they've made some sort of progress since then, but as we'll go through here, there's not much progress being made. Geothermal is used to create hydrogen, and again, they wanted to use it to power their cars, buses, and they have a large fishing fleet. So fishing is a major export for them, along with aluminum. So those are the two big ones, and so they wanted to be able to turn their boats into hydrogen energy so that they could reduce the CO2 emissions that they're producing by them. Not really the case, but we'll kind of go through that here. Yeah, there's definitely a bump in the road. 10 years into the experiment, disaster struck. Of course it did. That was the recession. So everybody went bankrupt. 3 of the largest banks in Iceland went bankrupt. So there was a big downslide. They haven't made much progress. 2050 is now being pushed back another 10 years, is what they're saying. There are no hydrogen buses on the road. So they did at one point produce 3 hydrogen buses that were powering the city. They became extremely inefficient. The overall system did not turn out the way they wanted it to, so there was no way for them to keep putting the buses on the road. What they're hoping for is the next generation buses to hit the road and possibly be more, but as of right now, there are no buses remaining on the road. As I mentioned before, boats, that was really their big thing because fishing is a major export, so they wanted their boats to be more energy efficient. There is no fishing boats currently in Iceland that are running on hydrogen. There is a hydrogen whale watching boat that's just used for tourism. It doesn't go very far. That's really the only one that they actually got up and running, and that is still running today. As I mentioned before, there are also some cars. Toyota Prius was one of them. It didn't work very well. It didn't have as long a range as they were hoping it would. Ford Focus and Ford Explorer were actually the 2 most successful hydrogen running vehicles on the road in Iceland at the time. Also, another bump in the road that has occurred is the emergence of electric cars. Tesla has been huge in the global economy. They're basically taking over the green initiative to make more energy efficient cars. Hydrogen has kind of been put back because energy is easier to produce on these cars. So that's another big thing Iceland is taking into account. Their 2050 goal of having a complete hydrogen society might not be a complete hydrogen society now. It may be a hydrogen society with electric cars. Like there will be no more complete hydrogen society. So that's something they had to take into effect. There we go. As I mentioned before, Professor Hydrogen, Professor Arneson is now 74, I believe. It's kind of tough to find anything on him on the internet. And he does drive one of the few hydrogen-powered vehicles on the road currently in Iceland. It's a Ford Explorer. It looks actually very, very similar to the picture I found. There wasn't very many of them. So I know in an article he posted, he said it would be very hard for him to ever go back and drive a gasoline vehicle after driving a hydrogen vehicle for so long. Obviously, if you know anything about cars, that Explorer is becoming extremely outdated. They already have a new model. I can't imagine how efficient that is going to be. So, I mean, we'll kind of hopefully hear something about that in the next few years. But again, electric cars are just kind of the new thing. So hybrid vehicles is kind of the way to go. In Iceland, there are still a few hydrogen vehicles on the road, but they are mostly used as tourist vehicles to tour the cities and stuff like that. Tourists can rent them. I think that's just kind of a way to say, like, hey, we are trying to become the energy, capital of the world, basically. We want to be a hydrogen economy. Come kind of check out our cars and see what see what they're all about. But most of the people on the road over there are not driving hydrogen vehicles at this point. What's next for hydrogen? There's not much in the news recently about hydrogen. I even went to couple of Iceland's newspaper websites, and there is not much. I know there wasn't just an article not too long ago about April of 2015. I need to pause in this video.